All right, let's get on to chapter 14. We left off 1, and he waited for the storm to break. The ringing of the phone, or more accurately, the way I received the ringing of the phone, was as familiar as the creaks of the chair or the hum of the old IBM Select. It seemed to come from far away at first. And I should introduce myself again. I am Lady Rain, and we are reading chapter 14 of Bag of Bones. It seemed to come from far away at first, then to approach like a whistling train coming down on a crossing. There was no extension in my office or Joe's. The upstairs phone, the old-fashioned rotary dial, was on the table in the hallway between them, in what Joe used to call no man's land. The temperature out there must have been at least 90 degrees, but the air still felt cool on my skin after the office. I was so oiled with sweat that I looked like a slightly pot-bellied version of the muscle boys I sometimes saw when I was working out. Hello? Mike, did I wake you? Were you sleeping? It was Maddie, but a different one from last night. This one wasn't afraid or even tentative. This one sounded so happy she was almost bubbling over. It was almost certainly the Maddie who had attracted Lance DeVore. Not sleeping, I said, writing a little. Get out! I thought you were retired. I thought so too, I said. But maybe I was a little hasty. What's going on? You sound over the moon. I just got off the phone with John Sturrow. Really? How long had I been on the second floor anyway? I looked at my wrist and saw nothing but a pale circle. It was half past freckles and skin o'clock, as we used to say when we were kids. My watch was downstairs in the north bedroom, probably lying in a puddle of water from the overturned night glass. His age, and that he could subpoena the other son. Whoa, I said, you lost me. Go back and slow down. She did. Telling the hard news didn't take long. It rarely does. Sturrow was coming up tomorrow. He would land at County Airport and stay at the Lookout Rock Hotel in Castle View. The two of them would spend most of Friday discussing the case. Oh, and he found a lawyer for you, she said, to go with you to the deposition. I think he's from Lewiston. It all sounded good, but what mattered a lot more than the bare facts was that Maddie had recovered her will to fight. Until this morning, if it was still morning, the light coming in the window above the broken air conditioner suggested that if it was, it wouldn't be much longer. I hadn't realized how gloomy the young woman in the red sundress and tidy white sneakers had been. How far down the road to believing she would lose her child. This is great. I'm so glad, Maddie. And you did it. If you were here, I'd give you a biggest kiss you ever had. He told you could win, didn't he? Yes. And you believed him? Yes. Then her voice dropped a little. He wasn't actually thrilled when I told him I'd have you over for dinner last night, though. No, I said, I didn't think you would be. I told him we ate in the yard, and he said we only had to be inside together for 60 seconds to start gossip. I'd said he's got an insulting low opinion of Yankee lovin', I said. But of course, he's from New York. She laughed harder than my little joke warranted, I thought, out of the semi-hysterical relief that she now had a couple of protectors. Because the whole subject of sex was a tender one for her just now, but not to speculate. He didn't paddle me too hard about it, but he made it clear that if we did it again, when this was over, though, I'm having you for a real meal. Oh, he made it clear that he would if we did it again. Okay. We'll have everything you like, just the way you like it. Everything you like, just the way you like it. And she was, by God and Sonny Jesus, completely unaware that what she was saying might have another meaning. I would have to bet on it. I closed my eyes for a moment, smiling. Why not smile? Everything she was saying sounded absolutely great, especially once you cleared the confines of Mike Noonan's dirty mind. It sounded like we might have the expected fairy tale ending. if we could keep our courage and hold our course. And if I could restrain myself from making a pass at a girl young enough to be my daughter, outside of my dreams, that was. If I couldn't, I'd probably deserved whatever I got. But Kyra wouldn't. She was a hood ornament of all this, doomed to go wherever the car took her. And if I got any wrong ideas, I'd do well to remember that. If the judge sends DeVore home empty-handed, I'll take you out to Rainier Nights in Portland and buy you 9 courses of French chow, I said. Storo, too. I'll even spring for the legal beagle I'm dating on Friday. So who's better than me, huh? No one I know, she said, sounding serious. I'll pay you back for this, Mike. I'm down now, and I won't always be down. And if it takes me the rest of my life, I'll pay you back. Maddie, you don't have to. I do, she said with a quiet vehemence. I do. And I have to do something else today, too. What's that? I loved hearing her sound the way she did this morning, so happy and free, like a prisoner who has just been paroled and let out of jail. But already I was looking longingly at the door of my office. I couldn't do much more today. I'd end up baking like an apple if I'd tried. But I wanted another page or two at least. Do what you want, both women had said in my dreams. Do what you want. I have to buy Kyra the big teddy bear they have at Castle Rock Walmart, she said. I'll tell her it's for being a good girl because I can't tell her it's for walking in the middle of the road when you were coming the other way. Just not the black one, I said. The words were out of my mouth before I knew they were even in my head. Huh? Sounding startled and doubtful. I said, bring me back one, I said. The words once more out and down the wire before I even knew they were there. Maybe I will, she said, sounding amused. Then her tone grew serious again. And if I said anything last night that made you unhappy, even for a minute, I'm sorry. I never, for the world. Don't worry, I said. I'm not unhappy. A little confused, that's all. In fact, I'm pretty much forgotten about Joe's mystery date. A lie, but in what seemed to me to be a good cause. That's probably for the best. I won't keep you. Go on to work. It's what you want to do, isn't it? I was startled. What makes you say that? I don't know. She stopped and suddenly knew 2 things. What she had been about to say and that she wouldn't say it. I dreamed about you last night. I dreamed about us together. We were going to make love and one of us said, do what you want. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe we both said it. Perhaps sometimes ghosts were alive, minds and desires divorced from our bodies, unlock impulses floating unseen. Ghosts from the id, spooks from low places. Maddie, still there? Sure, you bet. Do you want me to stay in touch, or will you hear all you need from John Sturrow? If you don't stay in touch, I'll be pissed at you, royally, she laughed. I will then. But not when you're working. Goodbye, Mike, and thanks again so much. I told her goodbye and stood there for a moment, looking at the old-fashioned Bakelite phone handset after she'd hung up. She'd call and keep me updated, but not when I was working. How would she know when that was? She just would. And I'd known last night that she was lying when she said Joe and the man with the elbow patches on the sleeves of the sport coat had walked off toward the parking lot. Maddie had been wearing a pair of white shorts and a halter top when she called me. No dress or skirt required today because it was Wednesday and the library was closed on Wednesday. You don't know any of that. You're just making it up. But if I'd been making it up, but I wasn't. If I'd been making it up, I probably would have put her in something a little more suggestive. A merry widow from Victoria's Secrets, perhaps. That thought called up another. Do what you want, they had said, both of them. Do what you want. And that was a line I knew. While in Key Largo, I'd read an Atlantic Monthly essay on pornography by some feminist. I wasn't sure which one, only that it hadn't been Naomi Wolf or Camille Paglia. The woman had been of a conservative stripe, and she had used that phrase. Really, Sally Tisdale, maybe. Or was my mind just hearing echo distortions of Sarah Tidwell? Whoever it had been, she claimed that do what I want was the basis of erotica, which appealed to women, and do what you want was the basis of pornography, which appealed to men. Women imagine speaking of the formal line in sexual situations. Men imagine having the latter line spoken to them. And the writer went on, when real-world sex goes bad, sometimes turning violent, sometimes shaming, sometimes just unsuccessful from the female partner's point of view, porn is often the unindicted co-conspirator. The man is apt to round on a woman angrily and cry, "You want me to? Quit lying and admit it. You want me to." The writer claimed it was what every man hoped to hear in the bedroom. Do what you want. Wine out of my navel. Give me a hairbrush and raise your ass for me to paddle. It doesn't matter. Do what you want. The door was closed and we are here. But really only you are here. I'm just a willing extension of your fantasies, and only you are here. I have no wants of my own, no needs of my own, no taboos. Do what you want to this shadow, this fantasy, this ghost. I thought the essayist had at least 50% at least 50% full of shit. The assumption that a man could find real sexual pleasure only by turning a woman into a kind of jack-off accessory says more about the observer than the participants. The lady had had a lot of jargon and a fair amount of wit, but underneath she was only saying what Somerset Maugham, Joe's old favorite, had Sadie Thompson say in Rain. A story written 80 years before. Men are pigs, filthy, dirty pigs, all of them. Phoebe! What are you doing? Stop that. Good gracious. But we are not pigs as a rule, not beasts, or at least not unless we are pushed to a final extremity. And if we are pushed to it, the issue is rarely sex. It's usually territory. I've heard feminists argue that to men, sex and territory are interchangeable, and that is very far from the truth. I paddled back to the office, opened the door, and behind me the telephone rang again. And here was another familiar sensation. Back for a return visit after 4 years. That anger ripped it out of the wall and fired across the room. Why did the whole world have to call while I was writing? Why couldn't they just, let me do what I wanted? I gave a doubtful laugh and returned to the phone, seeing the wet handprint on it from my last call. Hello? I said to stay visible while you were with her. Well, good morning to you too, Lawyer Storrow. You must be in another time zone up there, chum. I've got 1:15 down here in New York. I had dinner with her, I said, outside. It's true that I read a little kid a story and helped her put her to bed, but I imagine half the town thinks you're bopping each other's brains out by now, and the other half will think it if I have to show up for her in court. But he didn't sound really angry. I thought he sounded as though he was having a happy feast day. Can they make you tell who's paying for your services? I asked. At the custody hearing, I mean? Nope. At my deposition on Friday? Christ, no. Durgan would lose all credibility as guardian ad lib if he went in that direction. Also, they have reasons to steer clear of the sex angle. Their focus is on Maddie as neglectful and perhaps abusive, proving that Mom isn't a nun, quit working around the time Kramer versus Kramer came out in the movie theaters. Nor is that the only problem they have with the issue. He now sounded positively gleeful. Tell me, Max DeVore is 85 and divorced, twice divorced, is point of fact. Before awarding custody to a single man of his age, secondary custody is to be taken into consideration. It is, in fact, the single most important issue, other than the allegations of abuse and neglect leveled at the mother. What are those allegations, do you know? No, Maddie doesn't either, because they're fabrications. She's a sweetie, by the way. Yeah, she is. And I think she's going to make a great witness. I can't wait to meet her in person. Meanwhile, don't sidetrack me. We're talking about secondary custody, right? Right. DeVore has a daughter who has been declared mentally incompetent and lives in an institution somewhere in California. Modesto, I think. Not a good bet for custody. It wouldn't seem so. The son Roger is, I heard a faint fluttering of notebook pages, 54, so he's not exactly a spring chicken either. Still, there are a lot of guys who become daddies at that age nowadays. It's a brave new world, but Roger is a homosexual. I thought of Bill Dean saying, "Rump wrangler." Understand there's a lot of that going around out there in California. I thought you said sex doesn't matter. Maybe I should have said heterosex doesn't matter in certain states. California is one of them. Homosex doesn't matter either, or not as much. But this case isn't going to be adjudicated in California. It's going to be adjudicated in Maine, where folks are less enlightened about how well two married men, married to each other, I mean, can raise a little girl. Roger DeVore is married? Okay, I admit it. I now felt a certain horrified glee myself. I was ashamed of it. Roger DeVore was just a guy living his life, and he might not have had much or anything to do with this elderly dad's current enterprise, but I felt it just the same. He and a software designer named Morris Ridding tied the knot in '96, John said. I found that on the first computer sweep. And if this does wind up in court, I intend to make as much of it as I possibly can. I don't know how much of it will be. At this point, it's impossible to predict. But if I get a chance to paint a picture of that bright-eyed, cheery little girl growing up with two elderly gays who probably spent more of their lives in computer chat rooms speculating about what Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock might have done before the lights were out in the officers' country, well, if I get the chance, I'll take it. It seems a little mean, I said. I heard myself speaking in the tone of a man who wants to be dissuaded, perhaps even laughed at, but that didn't happen. Of course it's mean. I feel like swerving up onto the sidewalk to knock over a couple of innocent bystanders. Roger DeVore and Morris Ridding don't deal drugs, traffic in little boys, or rob old ladies. But this is custody, and custody does an even better job than divorce of turning human beings into insects. This one isn't as bad as it could be, but it's bad enough because it's so naked. Max DeVore came up there to his old hometown for one reason and one reason only, to buy a kid. That makes me mad. I grinned, imagining a lawyer who looked like Elmer Fudd standing outside of a rabbit hole marked DeVore with a shotgun. My message to DeVore is going to be very simple. The price of the kid just went up, probably to a figure higher than even he can afford. If it goes to court, you've said that a couple of times now. Do you think there's a chance DeVore might just drop it and go away? A pretty good one, yeah. I'd say an excellent one if he wasn't old and used to getting his own way. There's also a question of whether or not he's still sharp enough to know where his best interests lie. I'll try for a meeting with him and his lawyer while I'm up there. But so far, I haven't managed to get past his secretary. Rogette Whitmore? No, I think she's a step further up the ladder. I haven't talked to her yet either, but I will. Try either Richard Osgood or George Footman, I said. Either of them may be able to put you in touch with DeVore or DeVore's chief counsel. I want to talk to the Whitman woman in any case. Men like DeVore tend to grow more and more dependent on their close advisors as they grow older, and she could be a key to getting him to let this go. She could also be a headache for us. She might urge him to fight, possibly because she really thinks he can win, and possibly because she wants to watch the fur fly. Also, she might marry him. Marry him? Why not? He could have her sign a prenup. I could no more introduce that in court than his lawyers could go fishing for who hired Maddie's lawyer. And it would strengthen his chances. John, I've seen the woman. She's got to be 70 herself. But She's a potential female player in the custody case involving a little girl, and she's a layer between old man DeVore and the married gay couple. We just need to keep that in mind. Okay. I looked at the office door again, not so longingly. There comes a point when you're done for the day, whether you want to be or not, and I thought I'd reached that point, perhaps in the evening. The lawyer I got for you is named Romeo Bissonette. He paused. Can that be a real name? Is he from Lewiston? Yes, how'd you know? Because in Maine, especially around Lewiston, that can be a real name. Am I supposed to see him? Or go see him? I didn't want to go see him. It was 50 miles to Lewiston, over 2-lane roads, which would now be crawling with campers and Winnebagos. What I wanted was to go swimming and take a long nap. A long, dreamless nap. You don't need to. Call him and talk to him a little. He's only a safety net, really. He'll object if the questioning leaves the incident on the morning of July 4th. About that incident, you tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Got it? Yes. Talk to him before, then meet him on Friday at... Wait, it's right here. The notebook pages fluttered again. Meet him at the Route 120 diner at 9:15. Coffee, talk a little, get to know each other. Maybe flip for a check. I'll be with Maddie, getting as much as I can. We may want to hire a private dick. I love it when you talk dirty. Uh-huh. I'm going to see the bills go to your guy, Goldacre. He'll send them to your agent, and your agent can... No, I said. Instruct Goldacre to send them directly here. Harold's a Jewish mother. How much is this going to cost me? $75,000 minimum, he said, with no hesitation at all. No apology in his voice either. Don't tell Maddie. All right. Are you having any fun yet, Mike? You know, I sort of am, I said thoughtfully. For 75 grand, you should. We said our goodbyes, and John hung up. And as I put my own phone back into its cradle, it occurred to me that I had lived more in the last 5 days than I had in the last 4 years. This time the phone didn't ring, and I made it all the way back into the office. But I knew I was definitely done for the day. I sat down at the IBM, hit the return key a couple of times, and was beginning to write myself the next note at the bottom of the page I'd been writing on when the phone interrupted me. What a sour little doodad the telephone is, and what little good news we get from it. Today had been an exception though, and I thought I could sign off with a grin. I was working, after all, working. Part of me still marveled that I was sitting here at all, breathing easily, my heart beating steadily in my chest, and not even a glimmer of an anxiety attack on my personal event horizon. I wrote, next, in brackets. Drake to Rayford, stops on the way to vegetable stand to talk to a guy who runs it. Old source, needs a good and colorful name. Straw hat, Disney World t-shirt. They talk about Shackleford. I turned the roller until the IBM spat this page out, stuck it on top of the manuscript, and jotted a final note to myself. Call Ted Rosencriff at Rayford. Rosencriff was a retired Navy man who lived in Derry. I had employed him as a research assistant on several books, using him on one project to find out how paper was made, what the migratory habits of certain common birds were for another, a little bit about the architecture of pyramid burial rooms for a third. And it's always a little bit I want, never the whole damn thing. As a writer, my motto has always been, don't confuse me with the facts. The Arthur Haley type of fiction is beyond me. I can't read it, let alone write it. I want to know just enough so I can lie colorfully. Rosie knew that, and we always worked well together. This time I needed to know a little bit about Florida's Rayford prison and what the death house down there is really like. I also needed a little bit on the psychology of serial killers. I thought Rosie would probably be glad to hear from me. Almost as glad as I was to finally have something to call him about. I picked up the 8 double-spaced pages I had written and fanned through them, still amazed at their existence. I had an old IBM typewriter and a courier-type ball been the secret all along? That was certainly how it seemed. What had come out was also amazing. I'd had article. There had been no writer's block in that regard. One had been really great, the sort of thing which certainly would have become a novel if I'd still been able to write novels. Half a dozen to a dozen were of a sort I'd classify as pretty good, meaning they do in a pinch, or if they happened to unexpectedly grow tall and mysterious overnight, like Jack's beanstalk. Sometimes they do. Most more glimmers, little what-ifs, that came and went like shooting stars while I was driving or walking or just laying in bed at night and waiting to go to sleep. The red shirt man was a what-if. One day I saw a man in a bright red shirt washing the show windows of the J.C. Penney store in Derry. This was not long before Penney's moved out to the mall. A young man and a woman walked under his ladder. Very bad luck, according to the old superstition. These two didn't know where they were walking, though. They were holding hands, drinking deeply of each other's eyes, as completely in love as any two 20-year-olds in the history of the world. The man was tall, and as I watched, the top of his head came within an ace of clipping the window washer's feet. If that had happened, the whole works might have gone forever, or might have gone over. The entire incident was history in 5 seconds. Writing The Red Shirt Man took 5 months. Except in truth, the entire book was done in what-if second. I imagined a collision instead of a near miss. Everything else followed from there. The writing was just secretarial. The idea I was certainly working on wasn't one of Mike's really great ideas. Joe's voice carefully made the capitals. But it wasn't a what-if either. Nor was it much like my old Gothic suspense yarns, V.C. Andrews, with a prick, was somewhere in sight this time. But if it felt solid, like the real thing, and this morning it had come out as naturally as breathing. Andy Drake was a private investigator in Key Largo. He was 40 years old, divorced, a father of a 3-year-old girl. At the open, he was in the Key West home of a woman named Regina Whitting. Mrs. Whitting also had a little girl, hers 5 years old. Mrs. Whitting was married to an extremely rich developer who did not know what Andy Drake knew. That until 1992, Regina Taylor Whitting had been Tiffany Taylor, a high-priced Miami call girl. That much I had written before the phone started ringing. Here's what I knew beyond that point. Secretarial work I'd do over the next several weeks, assuming that my marvelously recovered ability to write held up. One day when Karen Whitting was 3, the phone had rung while she and her mother were sitting in the patio hot tub. Regina thought of asking a yard guy to answer it, decided to get it herself. Their regular man was out with the flu, and she didn't feel comfortable about asking a stranger for a favor. Cautioning her daughter to sit still, Regina hopped out to answer the phone. When Karen pulled up a hand to keep from being splashed as her mother left the tub, she dropped the doll she had been bathing. When she bent to pick it up, her hair became caught in one of the hot tub's powerful intakes. It was reading of a fatal accident like this that had originally kicked the story off in the mind 2 or 3 years before. The yard man, some no-name in a khaki shirt, sent over by a day labor outfit, saw what was happening. He raced over the dawn, dove headfirst into the tub, and yanked the girl from the bottom, leaving hair and a good chunk of scalp clogging the jet when he did. He'd give her artificial respiration until she began to breathe again. This would be a wonderful, suspenseful scene, and I couldn't wait to write it. He would refuse all of the hysterical, relieved mother's offers to recompense, although he'd finally give her an address so that her husband could talk to him. Only both the address and the name, John Sanborn, would turn out to be a fake. 2 years later, the ex-hooker, with the respectable second life, sees the man who saved her child on the front page of a Miami paper. His name is given as John Shackelford, and he had been arrested for the rape murder of a 9-year-old girl. And the article goes on. He was suspected in over 40 other murders, many of the victims' children. Have you caught baseball cap? One of the reporters would yell at the press conference. Is John Shackelford baseball cap? Well, I said, going downstairs. They sure think he is. I could hear too many boats out on the lake this afternoon to make nude bathing an option. I pulled on my suit, slung a towel over my shoulders, and started down the path, the one which had been lined with glowing paper lanterns in my dream, to wash off the sweat of my nightmares and my unexpected morning labors. There were 23 railroad tie steps between Sara and the lake. I had gone down only 4 or 5 before the enormity of what had just happened hit me. My mouth began to tremble. The colors of the trees and the sky mixed together as my eyes teared up. A sound began to come out of me, a sound of muffled groaning. The strength ran out of my legs, and I sat down hard on a railroad tie. For a moment I thought it over, mostly just a false alarm, and then I began to cry. I stuffed one end of the towel in my mouth during the worst of it, afraid that if the boaters on the lake heard the sounds coming out of me, they'd think someone up here was being murdered. I cried in grief for the empty years I had spent without Joe, without friends, and without my work. I cried in gratitude because those workless years seemed to be over. It was too early to tell for sure. One swallow doesn't make a summer, and 8 pages of hard copy don't make a career resuscitation. But I thought it really might be so, and I cried out of fear as well. As we do when some awful experience is finally over, or when some terrible accident has been narrowly averted. I cried because I suddenly realized that I had been walking a white line ever since Joe died, walking straight down the middle of the road. By some miracle, I had been carried out of harm's way. I had no idea who had done the carrying, but that was all right. It was a question that could wait for another day. I cried it all out of me. Then I went on down to the lake and waded in. The cool water felt more than good on my overheated body. It felt like a resurrection. Chapter 15. State your name for the record. Michael Noonan. Your address. Derry is my permanent address, 14 Benton Street, but I also maintain a home on the TR 90 on Dark Score Lake. The mailing address is Box 832. The actual house is on Lane 42 off of Route 68. Elmer Durgan, Kira Devore's guardian ad litem, waved a pudgy hand in front of his face, either to shoo away some troublesome insect or to tell me that was enough. I agreed that it was. I felt rather like a little girl in our town who gave her address to Grover's Corner, New Hampshire, America. The Northern Hemisphere, the world, the solar system, the Milky Way galaxy, the mind of God. Mostly, I was nervous. I'd reached the age of 40, still a virgin in the area of court proceedings, and although we were in a conference room of Durgan, Peters, and Jarrett on Bridge Street in Castle Rock, this was still a court proceeding. There was one mentionably odd detail to these festivities. The stenographer wasn't using one of those keyboards on a post that look like adding machines, but a stenomask, a gadget which fit over the lower half of his face. I had seen them before, but only in old black and white crime movies. The one where Dan Duryea or John Payne is always driving around in a Buick with portholes on the sides, looking grim and smoking a Camel. Glancing over into the corner and seeing a guy who looked like the world's oldest fighter pilot was weird enough, but hearing everything you said immediately repeated in a muffled monotone was even weirder. Thank you, Mr. Noonan. My wife has read all your books and says you are her favorite author. I just wanted to get that on the record. Durgan chuckled fatly. Why not? He was a fat guy. Most fat people I like. They have expansive natures to go with their expansive waistlines. But there is a subgroup which I think of as the evil little fat folks. You don't want to fuck with the elves, huh? If you can help it. They will burn your house and rape your dog if you give them half an excuse or a quarter of an opportunity. Few of them stand over 5'2". Durgan's height, I estimated, and maybe are under 5 feet. Many are under 5 feet. They smile a lot, but their eyes don't smile. The evil little fat folks hate the whole world. Mostly they hate folks who can look down the length of their bodies and still see their own feet. This included me, although just barely. Please thank your wife for me, Mr. Durgan. I'm sure she could recommend one for you to start on. Durgan chuckled. On his right, Durgan's assistant, a pretty little woman who looked approximately 17 minutes out of law school, chuckled. On my left, Romeo Bissonette chuckled. In the corner, the world's oldest F-111 pilot only went on muttering into his stenomask. I'll wait for the big screen version, he said. His eyes gave an ugly little gleam, as if he knew a feature film had never been made from one of my books. Only a made-for-TV movie of Being 2 that pulled ratings roughly equal to the National Sofa Refinishing Championships. I hoped that we'd complete this chubby little fuck's idea of the pleasantries. I am Kira DeVore's guardian ad lib, he said. Do you know what that means, Mr. Noonan? I believe I do. It means, Durgan rolled on, that I have been appointed by Judge Rancourt to decide, if I can, where Kira DeVore's best interests lie, should a custody judgment become necessary. Judge Rancourt would not, in such an event, be required to base his decision on my conclusions, but in many cases, that is what happens. He looked at me, with his hands folded on the black legal pad. The pretty assistant, on the other hand, was scribbling madly. Perhaps she didn't trust the fighter pilot. Durgan looked as if he expected a round of applause. Was that a question, Mr. Durgan? I asked, and Romeo Bassinet delivered a light, practiced chip of one ankle. I didn't need to look at him to know it wasn't an accident. Durgan pursed his lips so smooth and damp that he looked as if he were wearing a clear gloss on them. On his shiny pate, roughly 24 strands of hair were combed in smooth little arcs. He gave me a patient, measuring look. Behind it was all the intransigent ugliness of an evil little fat folk. The pleasantries were over all right, and I was sure of that. No, Mr. Noonan, that was not a question. I simply thought you might like to know why we had asked you to come away from your lovely lake on such a pleasant morning. Perhaps I was wrong. Now, if there was a peremptory knock on the door, followed by your friend and his George Footman. Today, Cleveland Casual had been replaced by khaki deputy sheriff's uniform, complete with Sam Brown belt and sidearm. He helped himself to a good look at the assistant's bust line, displayed in a blue silk blouse, then handed her a folder and a cassette tape recorder. He gave me one brief gander before leaving. I remember you, buddy, that glance said. That smart-ass writer, the cheap date. Romeo Bassinet tipped his head toward mine. He used the side of his hand to bridge the gap between his mouth and my ear. Divorce tapes, he said. I nodded to show I understood, then turned to Durgan again. Mr. Noonan, you've met Kira DeVore and her mother, Mary DeVore, haven't you? How did you get Maddie out of Mary, I wondered. But then knew. Just as I had known about the white shorts and the halter top, Maddie was how Kai had first tried to say Mary. Maddie. Ah! Mr. Noonan, are we keeping you up? There's no need to be sarcastic, is there? Bissonette asked. His tone was mild, but Elmer Dugan gave him a look which suggested that, Should the elves succeed in their goal of world domination, Bissonnette would be aboard the first Gulag-bound boxcar. I'm sorry, I said before Dugan could reply. I just got derailed there for a second or two. New story idea? Durgan asked, smiling his glossy smile. He looked like a swamp toad in a sport coat. He turned to the old jet pilot, told him to strike that last, then repeated his question about Kira and Maddie. Yes, I said. I had met them. Once or more than once? More than once. How many times have you met them? Twice. Have you spoken to Mary DeVore on the phone? Already these questions were moving in a direction that made me uncomfortable. Yes. How many times? 3. The third time had come the day before, when she had asked if I could join her and John Storrow for a picnic lunch on the town common before my deposition. Lunch right there in the middle of town before God and everybody. Although, with the New York lawyer to play chaperone, what harm in that? Have you spoken to Kira DeVore on the phone? What an odd question. Not one anybody had prepared me for, either. I suppose that was at least partly why he had asked it. Mr. Noonan? Yes, I've spoken to her once. Can you tell the nature of that conversation? Well, I looked doubtfully at Bissonnette, but there was no help there. He obviously didn't know either. Maddie? Pardon me? Durgan leaned forward as much as he could. His eyes were intent in their pink pocket of flesh. Maddie? Maddie DeVore, Mary DeVore. You call her Maddie? Yes, I said, and had a wild impulse to add, in bed I call her that. Oh, Maddie, don't stop, I cry. It's the name she gave me when she introduced herself. I met her. We may get to that, but right now I'm interested in the telephone conversation with Kira DeVore. When was that? Yesterday. July 9th, 98? Yes. Who placed that call? Mary DeVore? Now he'll ask why she called, I thought, and I'll say she wanted to have yet another sex marathon foreplay to consist of feeding each other chocolate-dipped strawberries while we look at pictures of naked malformed dwarves. How did Kira DeVore happen to speak to you? She asked if she could. I heard her saying to her mother that she had something to tell me. And what was it that she had to tell you? That she had her first bubble bath. Did you also say she coughed? I was quiet looking at him. In that moment, I understood why people hated lawyers, especially when they've been dusted over by one who's good at the job. Noonan, would you like me to repeat the question? No, I said, wondering where he'd gotten this information. Had these bastards tapped Maddie's phone, my phone, both? Perhaps for the first time I understood, on a gut level, what it must be like to have $500 million. With that much dough, you can tap a lot of telephones. She said her mother pushed bubbles in her face, and she coughed. But she was, thank you, Mr. Noonan. Now let's turn to, let him finish, Bissonnette said. I had an idea he'd already taken a biggest part of the proceedings, and then he had expected to, but he didn't seem to mind. He was a sleepy-looking man with a bloodhound's mournful, trustworthy face. This isn't a courtroom, and you're not cross-examining him. I have a little girl's welfare to think of, Durgan said. He sounded both pompous and humble at the same time, a combination that went together like chocolate sauce on a creamed corn. It's a responsibility I take very seriously. If I seem to be badgering you, Mr. Noonan, I apologize. I didn't bother accepting his apology. That would have made us both phonies. All I was going to say is that Kai was laughing when she said it. She said she and her mother both had a bubble fight. When her mother came back on, she was laughing too. Durgan had opened a folder Footman had brought him and was paging rapidly through it while I spoke, as if he weren't hearing a word. Her mother, Maddie, as you call her? Yes, Maddie, as I call her. How do you know about our private telephone conversations in the first place? That's none of your business, Mr. Noonan. He selected a single sheet of paper and closed the folder. He held the paper up briefly, like a doctor studying an X-ray, and I could see it was covered with single-spaced typing. Let's turn to your initial meeting with Mary and Kira DeVore. That was the 4th of July, wasn't it? Yes. Durgan was nodding. The morning of the 4th, and you met Kyra Devore first? Yes. You met her first because her mother wasn't with her at the time? Was she? That's a badly phrased question, Mr. Dargan, but I guess the answer is yes. I'm flattered to have my grammar corrected by a man who's been on the bestsellers list, Dargan said, smiling. The smile suggested that he'd like to see me sitting next to Romeo Bessonet on that first Gulag-bound boxcar. Tell us about your meeting, first with Kyra Devore and then with Mary Devore, or Maddie, if you like that better. I told the story. When I was finished, Durgan centered the tape player in front of him. The nails of his pudgy fingers looked as glossy as his lips. Mr. Noonan, you could have run Kira over, is that true? Absolutely not. I was going 35. That's the speed limit there by the store. I saw her in plenty of time to stop. Suppose you had been coming in the other way, though, heading north instead of south. Would you still have seen her in plenty of time? That was a fairer question than some of the others, actually. Someone coming the other way would have had a far shorter time to react still. Yes, I said. Durgan went up with an eyebrows. You're sure of that? Yes, Mr. Durgan. I might have had to come down a little harder on the brakes, but at 35? Yes, at 35. I told you, that's the speed limit. On that particular stretch of Route 68, yes, you told me that. You did. Is that your experience that most people obey the speed limit on that part of the road? I haven't spent much time in the TR since 93, so I can't. Come on, Mr. Noonan. This isn't a scene from one of your books. Just answer my questions, or we'll be here all morning. I'm doing my best, Mr. Dargan. He sighed and put upon. You've owned your place on Dark Squirrel Lake since the 80s, haven't you? And the speed limit around the Lakeview General Store, the post office, and Dick Brooks' all-purpose garage, what's called the North Village, hasn't changed since then, has it? No, I admitted. Returning to my original question then, in your observation, do most people on that stretch of road obey the 35-mile-an-hour limit? I can't say if it's most, because I've never done a traffic survey, but I guess a lot don't. Would you like to hear Castle County Sheriff's Deputy Footman testify on whether the greatest number of speed tickets are given out in TR 90, Mr. Noonan? No, I said quite honestly. Did other vehicles pass you while you were speaking first with Kyra Devore and then with Maddie Devore? Yes. How many? I don't know exactly. A couple. Could it have been 3? I guess. 5? No, probably not so many. But you don't know exactly, do you? No. Because Kyra Devore was upset? Actually, she had it together pretty well for a... Did she cry in your presence? Well, yes. Did her mother make her cry? That's unfair. And as unfair as allowing a 3-year-old to go strolling down the middle of a busy highway on a holiday morning, in your opinion, or perhaps not quite as unfair as that. Jeepers, lay off, Mr. Bassinet said mildly. There was a distress on his bloodhound's face. I withdraw the question, Durgan said. Which one? I asked. He looked at me tiredly, as if to say he had put up with assholes like me all the time, and he had used to how, well, we behaved. How many cars went by from the time you picked the child up and carried her to safety to the time you and the Devores parted company? I hated that carried her to safety bit, but even as I formulated my answer, the old guy was muttering the question into his stenomask, and it was in fact what I had done. There was no getting around it. I told you I don't know for sure. Well, give me a guesstimate. A guesstimate? One of my all-time least favorite words. A Paul Harvey word. There might have been 3, including Mrs. Devore herself driving he consulted the paper he'd taken from the folder, an 82 Jeep Scout. I thought of Kai saying Maddie go fast and understood where Durgan was heading now, and there was nothing I could do about it. Yes, it was her. And it was Scout. I don't know what year. Was she driving below the posted speed limit, at the posted speed limit, or above the posted speed limit when she passed the place where you were standing with Kai in your arms? She had been doing at least 50, but I told Durgan I couldn't say for sure. He urged me to try. I know you are unfamiliar with the hangman's knot, Mr. Noonan, but I'm sure you can make one if you really work it. And I declined as politely as I could. He picked up the paper again. Mr. Noonan, Would it surprise you to know that two witnesses, Richard Brooks, Jr., the owner of Dick's All-Purpose Garage, and Royce Merrill, the retired carpenter, claimed that Mrs. DeVore was doing well over 35 when she passed your location? I don't know. I was concerned with the little girl. Would it surprise you to know that Royce Merrill estimated her speed at 60 miles an hour? That's ridiculous. When she hit the brakes, she would have skidded sideways and landed upside down in a ditch. The skid marks measured by Deputy Footman indicate the speed of at least 50 miles an hour, Durgan said. It wasn't a question, but he looked at me almost roguishly, as if inviting me to struggle a little more and sink a little deeper into my nasty pit. Oh, good, we still got an hour. I said nothing. Durgan folded his pudgy little hands and leaned over them toward me. The roguish look was gone. Mr. Noonan, if you hadn't carried Kyra DeVore to the side of the road, if you hadn't rescued her, might have her own mother have run her over? Here was the really loaded question, and how should I answer it? Bissonnette was certainly not flashing any helpful signs. He seemed to be trying to make meaningful eye contact with a pretty assistant. I thought of the book Maddie was reading in tandem with Bartley, Silent Witness, by Richard North Patterson. Unlike the Grisham brand, Patterson's lawyers almost always seemed to know what they were doing. Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation on the part of the witness. I shrugged. Sorry, counselor. Can't say. Left my crystal ball home. Again, I saw the ugly flash in Durgan's eyes. Mr. Noonan, I can assure you that if you don't answer the questions here, you are apt to be called back to Malibu or Fire Island or wherever it is you're going to write your next opus to answer it later on. I shrugged. I already told you I was concerned with the child. I can't tell you how fast the mother was going, or how good Royce Merrill's vision is, or if Deputy Footman even measured the right set of skid marks. There's a whole bunch of rubber on that part of the road, I can tell you. Suppose she was going 50, or even 55, let's say. She's 21 years old, Durgan. At the age of 21, a person's driving skills are at their peak. She probably would have swerved around the child, and easily. I think that's quite enough. Why? Because you're not getting what you wanted? Bissonnette's shoe clicked my ankle again, but I ignored it. If you're on Kira's side, why would you sound as though you're on her grandfather's? A baleful little smile touched Durgan's lips, the kind that says, okay, smart guy, you want to play? He pulled the tape recorder a little closer to him. Since you have mentioned Kira's grandfather, Mr. Maxwell DeVore of Palm Springs, let's talk about him a little bit, shall we? It's your show. Have you ever spoken to Max DeVore? Yes, in person or on the phone. Phone. I thought about adding that he had somehow gotten a hold of my unlisted number, then remembered that Maddie had too, and decided to keep my mouth shut on that subject. When was this? Last Saturday night, the night of the 4th. He called while I was watching the fireworks, and was the subject of your conversation that morning's little adventure. As he asked, Durgan reached into his pocket and brought out a cassette tape. There was an ostentatious quality to this gesture. In that moment, he looked like a parlor magician showing you both sides of the silk handkerchief, and he was bluffing. He couldn't be sure of that, and yet I was. I couldn't be sure of that, and yet I was. DeVore had taped our conversation all right, and that underhum really had been too loud, and on some level, I'd been aware of that fact even while I was talking to him. And I thought it really was on the cassette Durgan was now slotting into the cassette player, and it was a bluff. I don't recall, I said. Now I gotta go back. What was... yes, about the little adventure. Durgan's hand froze in the act of snapping the cassette's transcript loaded panel shut. He looked at me with frank disbelief and something else. I thought that something else was surprise anger. You don't recall? Come on, Mr. Noonan. Surely writers train themselves to recall conversations. And this one was only a week ago. Tell me what you talked about. I really can't say, I told him in a stolid, colorless voice. For a moment, Durgan looked almost panicky, and his features smoothed. One polished fingernail slipped back and forth over keys marked reverse, forward, play, and record. "How did Mr. Devore begin the conversation?" he said. He asked. "He said hello," I said mildly, and there was a short, muffled sound from behind the stenograph. It could have been the old guy clearing his throat, and it could have been a suppressed laugh. Spots of color were blooming on Durgan's cheeks. After hello, what then? I don't recall. Did he ask you about that morning? I don't recall. Didn't you tell him that Miss Mary Devore and her daughter were together, Mr. Noonan? That they were together picking flowers. Isn't that what you told this worried grandfather when he inquired about the incident which was the talk of the township that 4th of July? Oh boy, Bassinet said. He raised one hand over the table, then touched the palm of the fingers of the other, taking a breath's teeth. Time out. Durgan looked at him. The flush of his cheeks was more pronounced now, and his lips had pulled back to show the tips of his small, neatly capped teeth. What do you want? He almost snarled, as if Bassinet had just dropped by to tell them about the Mormon way, or perhaps the Rosicrucians. I want you to stop leading this guy, and I want the whole thing about picking flowers stricken from the record, Bassinet said. Why? Because you're trying to get stuff on the record that this witness won't say. If you want to break here for a while so we can make a conference call to Judge Rancourt, get his opinion, I withdraw the question, Durgan said. He looked at me with a kind of helpless surge rage. Mr. Noonan, do you want to help me do my job? I want to help Kira Devore if I can, I said. Very well, he nodded, as if no distinction had been made. Then please tell me what you and Max Devore talked about. I don't recall. I caught his eyes and held them. Perhaps, I said, you can refresh my recollection. There was a moment of silence that, which sometimes strikes a high-stakes poker game just after the last of the bets have been made and just before the players show their hands. Even the old fighter pilot was quiet, his eyes unblinking above the mask. Then Durgan pushed the cassette player aside with the heel of his hand. The set of his mouth said he felt about it just then, as I often felt about the telephone, and went back to the morning of July 4th. He never asked about my dinner with Maddie and Kai on Tuesday night, and never returned to my telephone conversation with Devore, the one where I had said all those awkward and easily disprovable things. I went on answering questions until 11:30, but the interview really ended with when Durgan pushed the cassette tape player away with the heel of his hand. I knew it, and I'm pretty sure he did too. Mike, over here. Maddie was waving from one of the tables in the picnic area behind the town commons bandstand. She looked vibrant and happy. I waved back and made my way in that direction. Weaving between little kids playing tag, skirting a couple of teenagers making out on the grass, and ducking a frisbee, which a leaping German shepherd caught smartly. There was a tall, skinny redhead with her, but I barely got a chance to notice him. Maddie met me while I was still on the gravel path, put her arms around me and hugged me. It was a no pudgy little ass poking out hug either. It was no pudgy little ass poking out either, a hug either, and then kissed me on the mouth hard enough to push my lips against my teeth. There was a hearty smack when she disengaged. She pulled back and looked at me with undisgusted delight. Was that the biggest kiss you ever had? The biggest in at least 4 years, I said. Will you settle for that? And if she didn't step away from me in the next few seconds, she was going to have physical proof of how much I had enjoyed it. I guess I'll have to. She turned to the redhead guy with a funny kind of defiance. Was that all right? Probably not, he said. But at least you're not currently in the view of those old boys at the all-purpose garage. Mike, I'm John Sturrow. Nice to meet you in person. I liked him at once, maybe because I'd come upon him dressed in his three-piece New York suit and primly setting out paper plates on a picnic table, while his curly red hair blew around his head like kelp. His skin was fair and freckled, the kind which would never tan, only burn, and then peel in great eczema-like patches. When we shook, his hands seemed to be all knuckles. He had to be at least 30, but he looked Maddie's age, and I guess it would be another 5 years before he was able to get a drink without showing his driver's license. Sit down, he said. We've got a 5-course lunch courtesy of Castle Rock Variety. Grinders, which are for some strange reason called Italian sandwiches. Up here, mozzarella sticks, garlic fries, Twinkies. That's only 4, I said. I forgot the soft drink course, he said, and pulled 3 large neck bottles of Soak birch beer out of the brown bag. Let's eat. Maddie runs the library from 2 to 8 on Fridays and Saturdays, and this would be a bad time for her to be missing work. How did the reader's circle go last night? I asked. Lindy Briggs didn't eat you alive, I see. She laughed, clapped her hands, and shook them over her head. I was a hit, an absolute smashola. I didn't dare tell them I got all my best insights from you. Thank God for small favors, Storrow said. He was freeing his own sandwich from its string and paper wrapping, doing it carefully and a little dubiously, using just the tips of his fingers. So I said I looked in a couple of books and found some leads there. It was sort of wonderful. I felt like a college kid. Good. Bassinet, John Storrow asked. Where's he? I never met the guy named Romeo before. What?
What time is Belle coming home?
I don't know. Probably 9:30. Why?
I just fed the cats.
Thank you.
Cat food.
What?
I just finished up the ones that were left in there.
We're out of cat food?
Yeah, because the cats keep on dumping the water fountain.
No. If they dump the bowls, they get to eat it off the floor, or you pick it up and put it in their bowls. I'm not throwing that cat food out because they want to eat off the floor. And they do. They eat off the floor. It's like the dogs eat off the floor.
Oh, Blake.
What?
Phoebe.
Give me that. Come and get it, please.
Phoebe, hardly move.
I don't know where she got it. All right.
And she threw it.
Go put it in the sink. Where's he? I never met a guy named Romeo before. Said he had to go right back to Lewiston. Sorry. Actually, it's best we stay small. At least to begin with. He bit into his sandwich. They came tucked into long sub rolls and looked at me surprised. This isn't bad. Eat more than 3 and you're hooked for life, Maddie said, and chomped heartily into her own. Tell us about the depot, John said. And while they ate, I talked. When I finished, I picked up my own sandwich and played a little catch-up. I'd forgotten how good the Italian can be, sweet, sour, and oily all at the same time. Of course, nothing that tastes that good can be healthy. That's a given. I suppose one could formulate a similar postulate about full-body hugs from young girls in legal trouble. Did you move away so she could go out? There she goes. Get Timber out there. Get Timber out there. Oh, he went outside. I can hear him come back. Get Timber out there.
He's like here.
Get him outside, please.
So
take him outside, please.
Okay, but I was going to let Timber know that Mommy's coming home.
She will later, but will you please put him out?
What time is it?
Only 8 o'clock. Will you please put him out? Thank you. Why do I have to argue with this boy? Of course, nothing that tastes that good can be healthy. That's a given. I suppose one could formulate a similar postulate about full-body hugs from young girls in legal trouble. Very interesting, John said. Very interesting indeed. He took a mozzarella stick from its greasy, stained bag, broke it open, and looked with a kind of fascinated horror at the clotted white chunk inside. People up here eat this? He asked. People in New York eat fish bladders, I said. Raw. Touché. He dipped a piece in the plastic container of spaghetti sauce. In this context, it is called cheese dip in western Maine. Then ate it. Well, I asked. Not bad. They ought to be a lot hotter, though. Yes, he was right about that. Eating cold mozzarella sticks is a little like eating cold snot. I can't help but laugh. Okay. Can I read now? Good gracious, you got the giggles. Okay, go watch your show. Go watch your show and get some chicken patties.
No,
I know you're laughing. What we're seeing is behind, so he's getting to see it twice. Yes, he is. This is my youngest son. You want to say hi?
Hi.
There he goes.
Why, French?
See. All right, go watch your show so I can finish up. I only have a little bit more to go. See,
Cool.
I have this much to go. Okay.
Okay.
All right, go on. Let me finish up. This is usually how our house is. He's got the giggles tonight, tell you. And then he got me giggling. Good gracious. Ah. Well, I asked. Not bad. They ought to be a lot hotter, though. Yes, he was right about that. Eating cold mozzarella sticks is a little like eating cold snot. An observation I thought I would keep to myself on this beautiful midsummer Friday. If Durgan had the tape, why wouldn't he play it? Maddie asked. I don't understand. John stretched his arms out, cracked his knuckles, and looked up at her benignly. We'll probably never know for sure, he said. He thought Devore was going to drop the suit. It was in every line of his body language and every inflection of his voice. That was hopeful, but it would be good if Maddie didn't allow herself to become too hopeful. John Sturrow wasn't as young as he looked, and probably not as guileless either. Or so I fervently hoped, but he was young, and neither he nor Maddie knew the story of Scooter Larrabee's sled, or had been Bill Dean's face when he seen Bill Dean's face when he told it. Want to hear some possibilities? Sure, I said. John put down his sandwich, wiped his fingers, and began to tick off points. First, he made the call. Taped conversations have a highly dubious value under those circumstances. Second, he didn't exactly come off as Captain Kangaroo, did he? No. Third, your fabrication impugns you, Mike, but not really very much. And it doesn't impugn Maddie at all. And by the way, that thing about Maddie pushing bubbles in Kira's face, I love that. If that's the best they can do, they better give it up right now. Last, and this is where the truth probably lies, I think Devore's got Nixon's disease.
Where's the chicken patties?
Probably downstairs in the freezer.
Okay.
Nixon's disease, Maddie asked. The tape Durgan had isn't the only tape. Can't be. And your father-in-law is afraid that if he introduces one tape made by whatever system he's got in Warrington's, we might subpoena all of them, and I'll damn well try. She looked bewildered. What could be on them? And if it's bad, why not just destroy them? Maybe he can't, he said. Maybe he needs them for other reasons. It doesn't really matter, John said. Durgan is bluffing, and that's what matters. He hit the heel of his hand lightly against the picnic table. I think he's going to drop it, I really do. It's too early to really think about that, I said. To think like that, I said, at once. But I could tell by Maddie's face, shining more brightly than ever, that the damage was done.
Do you want some pizza?
Why, is there pizza left?
That's it. The box.
Go ahead and throw it in. First, you might want to set the timer, or the, set the temperature.
Yeah, it says right here 400.
All right, set it to 400 while you go down and get it.
Okay.
That way it can start That way it can start preheating. Fill him in on what else you've been doing, Maddie told John. Then I've got to get to the library. Where do you send Kira on your workdays? I asked. Mrs. Cullum's. She lives 2 miles up the Wasp Hill Road. Also in July, there's VBS, Vacation Bible School, from 10 till 3. That's Vacation Bible School. Kai loves it, especially the singing and the flannel board stories about Noah and Moses. The bus drops her off at Arlene's.
The pizza pans.
They should be down there.
No. They're right there. They're on the stove.
So use one.
Okay.
And I pick her up around 9:15. She smiled a little wistfully. By then, she's usually fast asleep on the couch. John held forth, not the held forth for the next 10 minutes or so. He hadn't been on the case long, but had already started a lot of balls rolling. A fellow in California was gathering facts about Roger DeVore and Morris Ridding. Gathering facts sounded so much better than snooping. John was particularly interested in learning about the quality of Roger DeVore's relations with his father, and if Roger was on record concerning his little niece from Maine, and if John was on the record concerning his little niece from Maine. John had also mapped out a campaign to learn as much as possible about Max DeVore's movements and activities since he'd come to the TR-90. To that end, he had the name of a private investigator, one recommended by Romeo Bissonnette, my rent-a-lawyer. As he spoke, paging rapidly through a little notebook he drew from the inside pocket of his suit coat, I remember what he'd said about Lady Justice during our telephone conversation. Slap some handcuffs on the broad's wrists and some tape over her mouth to go along with the blindfold, rape her and roll her in the mud. That was maybe a bit strong for what we were doing, but I thought at the very least we were shoving her around a little. I imagine.
Can you pass that for a moment?
No.
I need to tell you something.
About what?
About your fridge. But I'd prefer if you
Give me 1 second, guys. That's okay. Don't worry about it. We have a something in our freezer that needs to be kept frozen. It's a dead body. We have a dead body in our freezer.